So welcome to OASI. Welcome to this book launch, the very first premier book launch of Psychiatry Interrogated and Institutional Ethnography Anthology, which I am proud to be the editor, the contributor, and I'm not sure how you put it, the person who trained a whole bunch of people in institutional ethnography to go out and do this research. And welcome to the revolution. I am welcoming the Toronto audience. I particularly, because I know there's some people who drove in from other countries, other cities, not quite that far. So a special welcome to people who made a special trip inward when it wasn't that easy. I'd also like to welcome, and this may sound strange to the Toronto audience, the New York audience. Parts of this are being videoed for the New York audience. New York is doing its book launch of this book in a couple of weeks, and they're going to begin by watching this video. So hello, New York. So before I go any further, something that's clearly come up, you probably have noticed I'm somebody with disabilities, and if you've been to other of my events, or you're one of my students, so been to my classes, you know that kind of has some, has some effect on things. So I'm going to ask people, if you approach me afterward, talk very quietly. If you're talking otherwise, talk quietly. Do not clap. And that's a terrible thing to ask an audience, especially when I have all these people presenting who want to be clapped for and who deserve to be clapped for. So I'm going to do a slight alteration in this. If one of our wonderful contributors is saying something that really moves you and you want to indicate that, stand up for a few minutes. And we'll take that standing up, you're standing up and applauding. Okay? Otherwise, but don't actually clap. And so that way you can express yourself and not lose me, and we'll figure this out from there. I want to thank all of the various people who made today possible. Who's first and foremost, overwhelmingly, I'd like to thank all the contributors to this anthology. You took on an unbelievable project to do a particular undone before institutional ethnography investigation into some aspect of psychiatry, with the vast majority having barely heard of institutional ethnography before. It's been a mitzvah being on this journey with you, and thank you for taking up the project. And never forget that it's your brilliance, your dedication, your courage that got us here today. I'd like to thank all of Coalition Against Psychiatric Assault, one of our co-sponsors. I'd like to thank the Department of Leadership, Higher and Education, one of our co-sponsors. I'd like to thank CWSE, Center for Women's Studies and Education, one of our co-sponsors. I'd like to thank the Transformative Learning Center for Community Activism, also one of our co-sponsors. I'd like to thank all the people who helped set up today, and there was a huge number of you, and who came to do tasks once the setup happened. Special thanks to Liam Walsh, our cook for the day. So thank you, Liam. The occasion of this book is in the final analysis, not in the immediate analysis, but the final analysis, psychiatry's invalidity. And the massive harm which it does. If it weren't for all of these things, we would probably have not so keenly been investigating all the different nooks and crannies of this area. Facts. So just a few facts that are givens for us as we proceeded about this journey. Facts. Psychiatric treatments do not address imbalances as it's claimed, but cause imbalances. They also cause things like school shooting and all the other things that most people blame on the lack of having sufficient drugs. Fact. Who benefits from the regime, from the treatment, is the psychiatric regime. Overwhelmingly, it is the psychiatric regime. Studies show that people who were never on the drugs over the long term, people labeled schizophrenic, so take the diagnosis that most worries you, that were never on the drugs over the long term fare better both in those who went on it and went off it later, and who fared best of all, people who never took it in the first place. This is 2007 research done over 20 years, and it is definitive. And since it came out, there was some more research on this, which came up with the exact same finding. These drugs sometimes feel very helpful to people in the first year. By the second year, the people who didn't go on them fare better, and 20 years later, the ones who never went on them in the first place, even the ones that did better initially, are not doing as well as the ones who never went on them in the first place. Very, very profound findings. So, other facts. Psychiatric system as we know it is a massive human rights violation. Indeed, involuntary commitment violates no less an authority than the United Nations, which has declared it a violation of international law. All involuntary treatment, all involuntary confinement of people who have committed no crime is a human rights violation, says the UN, and the UN has instructed judges that they should be ordering mental institutions to unlock their doors. Don't hold your breath, but just so you know what authoritative sources are saying. Fact. No credibility can be placed in the vast, vast majority of psychiatric research. Why? Because it is more an effort, it is more a propaganda tool than honest research. Just to give you an example, if people do better on placebo, they're taken out of the placebo group and assigned to another, so it's hidden that they did better on placebo. I could name you about 50 other standard violations. In the end, what has been shown, the biggest interesting thing is the 4 to 6 week studies that find they're not harmful. And that's really strange because most of the harm comes within the first year. It's no accident that they said the 4 to 6 week studies are the gold standard. It's precisely what hides everything that's in their interest to hide for people to find themselves with no life 2 years down the road. Fact. To understand psychiatry, one has to understand it's a massive institution with tentacles everywhere. And as a result, we cannot understand it by only looking at the drugs, by only looking at electroshock. We actually have to see how this institution works, which is why motivation for a book like the one that we're doing a launch for today. I'm delighted to be one of those people battling psychiatric rule, and I'm especially delighted to be talking to you at this juncture. For a long time, us people who have been anti-psychiatry scholars, anti-psychiatry activists, saw nothing but the power of psychiatry grow exponentially. Let me be clear, the power of psychiatry is still growing exponentially. Nonetheless, there are signs that those of us combating psychiatry are beginning to win. And so it's really nice, and many of us waited for decades to see that happen. What are the signs? Well, let me give you one example. Research shows that people going into medicine, the least popular specialty, the one they do not want to go into, is psychiatry. Interesting. And when asked why, and there's studies done on this, they say because it's not scientific. They're right. But the fact that it's actually keeping people, that people are actually loath to go in. A whole issue of Acta Scandinavica, which is a psychiatric journal that comes out of Sweden, I believe, was devoted to what do we do about psychiatry's bad image, because it has such a bad image in medical school and in the world at large. That's a good sign. That's a very promising sign. There are signs right here. We see people turning up to anti-psychiatry events that they didn't used to turn up to before in great numbers. I did a library talk on a reference library. 220 people turned up. We can only look around today, and we can also see a lot of people turn up. People know there's something wrong and they want to hear about it. And then we're seeing breakthroughs, and whenever we have breakthroughs, we have a lot of bad press. But nonetheless, the breakthroughs are still real. It's precisely because they are real that we get the bad press. And so I want to say we have right now a scholarship which has been accepted by U of T, an anti-psychiatry scholarship at Oise, at University of Toronto, the very first in the world. That is a breakthrough. That is a monumental breakthrough, and is announcing to the world something that a whole lot of people don't want to know. Anti-psychiatry is a legitimate area of study, a worthy area of study, a worthy area being funded. So something really huge is happening right now. And this book launch is part of it. I need to get a glass of water just a minute. Now there's lots of important books in this area, and you have no idea how many. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of really good books in this area of scholarship, and it is also growing exponentially. What makes this one special, and they're all special, so let me be clear about that, it is the first anthology of institutional ethnography investigations in psychiatry. That's one of the things that makes it special. Another thing that makes it special is it delves into areas of the regime barely touched on before. Things like, how is it in Poland no one who is being voluntarily committed can get decent legal representation? This is traced in this book, and it's traced very well. So it delves into all these very interesting nooks and crannies that very little thought has been put into before. The IE aspect, that's institutional ethnography aspect, is also very important. It's not an accident that this methodology employed is IE, is institutional ethnography. The point is that given the centrality of the institution of psychiatry to what happens to people in their everyday lives, and given the centrality of certain texts that psychiatry uses, like the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual of Mental Disorder, like the Mental Health Acts, to accomplish its role, institutional ethnography is an ideal approach for interrogating psychiatry and for unpacking the rule that is at the very core of what psychiatry is all about. Without tools like institutional ethnography, it is hard to cut through the hegemony of psychiatry because it's circular and it all reinforces itself. The nice thing about institutional ethnography is it not only allows you to trace it, but it allows you to totally step outside of the institution so you can really see how the institution is created, how it operates, how it continues to be recreated. And you get to see how documents get activated and how people who seem like reasonably nice people come to act the way they do. If this book is special, first and foremost, because of content and because of method, I'd like to say that process was also significant. How did the book come about? From July 7th to September 18th of 2014, I held 5 workshops, most of them 2-day workshops, to teach people how to use institutional ethnography to investigate psychiatry. And people came in through the internet. We had more people through the internet than we had in person, and we nonetheless had quite a number of people coming in, people in person. And people at the end of the workshop started forming teams. And why did we form teams? Besides that, forming teams is always a nice thing to do. Because so many people turned up, we would have had too many chapters for a book, too many pieces of research. So people started forming teams. And it was really interesting to see what happened because people got very excited. So some people who came only because not to do this research, but because this was a way of doing, of getting free training in institutional ethnography, said, I think I want to stay on, and I want to be part of this, and I want to be part of a team, and a whole bunch of people came in that way. And then other people joined them later, and the teams grew. One of the teams grew to 15 people. Quite something. Some really terrific truths about the researchers who created this anthology. Most researchers had little or no previous institutional ethnography training. I think that's called chutzpah or courage, depending on how you think of it, but it was terrific. And so what they took on was a highly ambitious learning curve. And I want to say that the people who had no previous knowledge wrote every bit as good chapters as the people who had hordes of knowledge. So let me be clear about that. This was a real success for the people. A huge percentage of the contributors to this anthology, well, there are contributors that came from Poland, contributors that came from England, contributors that came from the States. A huge number of the contributors are current or former OISE students or are about to become OISE students. So, for instance, some of the people were once OISE students, some of the people were current OISE students, other people went in on the project, wrote the chapter, and then applied to OISE, and everyone who did that, tattletale, got in, because they did such terrific work. So when they attached it to their application, they looked really great. So there's a special connection between, although this is an international publication, there's a special connection with this book and OISE. I feel great about all the teams, and I think all the teams did really interesting work. I want to mention one in particular, and it's because of the composition of this team. The New York team, hello there, New York again. The New York team, some people eventually dropped out, but the people who were in there from the beginning of the research initially constituted 15 New York psychiatric survivors trying to grapple and doing their best to grapple with institutional ethnography. And they did indeed come up with a chapter and come up with a very interesting chapter on the psychiatrization of spirituality. I should also say that about a third of the contributors to the anthology are psychiatric survivors. So that division, here are the survivors and here are the scholars, no, everyone was a scholar and everyone was in this together. Now, this book is important first and foremost, as I've said, because it traces psychiatric rule. It shows you how these different aspects of the regime come together, how they are constructed, and because it opens up areas not touched on before. So that is overwhelmingly the primary interest of this book. But for those interested in methodology, and I know some people are here today because they are interested in methodology, it also is interesting because it includes a critique of institutional ethnography and new ways of using institutional ethnography that could put institutional ethnography itself on a somewhat more critical path. In this regard, I just want to read you from the last section of the book called The Afterword, something I wrote, and I kept it brief because I know not everyone's interested in methodology. Quote, which brings us to a critical question, one stemming from the survivor-centric nature of this project. Unquestionably, one of the great strengths of IE is the emphasis traditionally placed on the standpoint of the hands-on institutional worker. Critical though this dimension be, and indeed pivotal for us as frontline workers, and pivotal as frontline workers' knowledge of institutional text act sequences inevitably is, the question nonetheless arises, why do IE researchers prioritize the location and research done by institutional workers to the extent that we do? If the standpoint of the oppressed is less partial and less perverse, what implication does this hold for those most oppressed by the system? To put this another way, insofar as we have a choice, why not give greater priority to the person or people experiencing the most horrific of the disjunctures, irrespective of whether or not they formally work for the organization, helping them become researchers and in the process achieving their own standpoints? An important question, and I think there are answers to this question that you see in the book, which is why it arose in the afternoon. That said, let me suggest that what I've just read encapsulates two final important features of the book and book project. The first is in part capacity building, in that it allows new tools to be available to anti-psychiatry activists and to the psychiatric survivor movement. I think that's really important. Whenever you have a new tool, there's something you couldn't do before you had this tool. And what this book helps make available is institutional ethnography as a way of digging at and getting into the organization, and a way of critiquing the organization, as a way of showing the problems with the organization. Second is there's a formal welding here of knowledge creation and activism There is an activist element that minimally is hinted at in every single contribution, in every single piece. May not be fully realized, and in most cases it is not, but there's a hint of it there. And so you can see where someone might go with it. That said, there is one piece that is fully activist, and it belongs to a tradition known as political activist ethnography, and that was the chapter written by Simon Adam and myself. I was first author, Simon second author, and we're going to be talking about the different chapters. I'm going to start by talking about it. It is called Stopping CAMH. I imagine everyone knows what we're talking about on some level there. And it began, as all institutional ethnographer investigations do, with a disjuncture. Something profoundly not okay had happened. And now we needed to know how it happened. And because we're activists, we had to combine it. We had to combat it, and those were joined. What had happened? Well, there we were minding our own business one day, and suddenly I got, the first day, 18 emails saying, what are you and Dawn going to do about this? Have you seen the Craigslist ad? Dawn is Dawn White, and people will know why they said Dawn and me. And what was the Craigslist ad? It was a Craigslist ad that was under the category jobs, etc. And it was offering people work. And $645 or 47, I can't remember, something along that nature, for something that would only take a few minutes of their time and was not going to be any problem. What was the work? Agreeing to be a guinea pig in a piece of research conducted by CAMH on electroshock. So they were reaching to the general public, people who would never remotely get electroshock otherwise, and advertising it as work. Good paid, well-paid work, and it only takes a few minutes of your time, and it's not very problematic. Well, you can see why people wrote us and said, what are you going to do? And Peter Bregan wrote us, everyone wrote us. And I said, it's okay, so should we have a demonstration? I said, well, we've demonstrated against CAMH ad infinitum. It doesn't do any good. I have an idea. I will lodge a complaint about this. First, let's get it off Craigslist, and we can do that by all registering complaints. So we got it off Craigslist. Then I registered a complaint with the Secretariat for Ethical Research. We have a special organization that oversees all research done at universities and done at hospitals, and it is hypothetically overseen by the Secretariat of Responsible Research. Everyone knows we have research ethics boards. They're governed by what's called the Tri-Council Policy Statement on Research. What is released by the Secretariat and overseen by the Secretariat. So as somebody who teaches research ethics, I knew every single violation in this piece of research, and I, in a letter that I got off over 24, I asked them to please do two things. One, stop the research. Two, please. So I did not complain about anyone doing personal misconduct. I said, there's something wrong with the system. I want CAMH's ethical review. I'm not claiming anything wrong by the person who did the research. There was no way for that to compute. And we continued with correspondence and with investigations, etc., that went on for a year. And what we found out in the process, I won't tell you about because I want you to read the chapter. Okay? But we found out things that not only made CAMH look bad, they made our entire oversight of research ethics in Canada look bad. So do read the chapter, because we found out very surprising things about what power the Secretariat had or didn't have, and believe me, it's almost none, which was a real shock to our system. Okay, that said, that is the first of the practice chapters in the book. And I want us to go on and to look at the other, a number of other chapters. Has our Ryerson colleague from chapter 2, chapter 3 here? You are? Okay, all right. All right, so our next speaker is part of the team who investigated and wrote a chapter called A Kind of Collective Freezing Out. And usually when you think of psychiatry, you don't necessarily think of all the various places where its tentacle reaches. Well, one of the places its tentacle reaches is to the licensed professions. because it can actually affect where nurses lose their jobs, where nurses never get to practice again, even though they are totally capable people who do competent work. That was the question investigated by Chapter 3. The person who will be speaking about it is somebody who the Toronto audience knows very well, social work professor at Ryerson, Dr. Jennifer Poole. Before we end this part of this evening, there's a few things I want to do. One is, I think people are probably aware that there has been huge attacks by the media on the scholarship, on me, and on U of T for allowing such a horrendous thing to happen. I want to first reassure people, besides that U of T is not pulling the plug, that we have not been hurt. Every time the media every time people get scared and start fighting us this way, it's because we're winning. And in fact, in a way, we've already won. They just don't quite know that yet. As Gandhi said, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win. They are fighting us, and we are winning. So please don't worry about it. As for its effect on the scholarship, let me say that we've had more contributions since they've started saying how horrible it was in the media than we had before. We've had the largest promise of a contribution that we've ever gotten after the attacks on the media, by the media. And so all press is good press here, and people, all sorts of people, see through these attacks. As for the scholarship itself, this is a great time to give to it, and you will see, you have like places on your seat where that allow you to make it, to put in a donation. There's a box outside. I do want you to know that we are in a unique position because we have had an offer that's not confirmed yet, so it's not 100% yet, but we're 80% there that it looks like it's going to happen. That besides that I am matching what you put in, after I match it, we have another person who wants to remain anonymous who's going to match it further. How often do you, in your life, do you get to make your money count 4 times what you gave? It looks like that's what we might be having here. This is a great time to give to the scholarship. That said, while I was supposed to be writing something called an activity report, it's when you, as a scholar, you say what are all the things you've done in the last year from which they should give you a raise. And you can't get a raise unless you do it. While I was supposed to be doing that, I found myself instead writing a poem for this evening. And so I want to end this evening with the poem. The poem was motivated and inspired by a poem by Elizabeth Barrett Browning. And incidentally, I'm not the first who's been inspired by her poems, so was John Breeding, and you might want to read his poem at some point. The poem that she wrote was called Curse for a Nation. And so this is a cursing poem. And she wrote it as a Victorian poet. She wrote it against the United States for the system of slavery. And I modeled this poem on her, and it's a very interesting set of curses because the curse she gives is continue doing the horrible things you do, because she could think of no worse curse to give people than they continue acting like the horrid people they are. This curse is along the same line, and like her curse, it begins with how I came to write the curse, and it ends with the curse. And so the last part of the poem is called The Curse. So my poem is called A Curse for a Cursed Profession. I heard an angel speak last night, and he said, write a curse against the profession of psychiatry for me, and send it over and against the therapeutic sea. I faltered, taking up the word. Not so, my lord, I answered. If curses there must be, choose another to send this curse against my brother. For I am a soul moved by love, love of everyone around me, love of the vulnerable,
love of the lofty, love of everyone who is or ever will be. Therefore, said the voice, shalt thou write my curse tonight. For the summit of love a curse is drawn, as lightning is from the tops of heaven. Forgive me, liege, I answered. Evermore my heart is sore for the sins of the modern state, for the little feet of drugged urchins who stagger across the street. But curse I cannot. Cursing is a man's job. I, a woman, have only known how the heart melts and tears run. Therefore, continued the angel, shalt thou write my curse tonight. Weep and write, for a curse from the depths of womanhood is salty and bitter and good. So thus I wept, and thus I wrote, what all may read, and thus as was beholden on me, for well I understood the necessity, I sent it over and against the therapeutic sea. The curse. Because thou hast broken the Hippocratic oath, because ye lie about science while donning its garb, and never so much as feel an ounce of shame as ye and thy professional brethren grab ever more power and fame, this is thy curse. Prescribe. When others uncover thy mistakes, cry foul, dismiss without consideration. When women whom thou hast electroshocked forget who they are, call it progress, and stand thy ground. And when the children of women arrive early at the grave, having been on Prozac since age 5, never forget, as doctors, you do no wrong, unlike the common throng. This is thy curse. Prescribe. Like Bismarck, like Attila the Hun, have thy arsenal always ready at hand. With words begin, with words end. Schizophrenia, call it. Bipolar, ADHD. If thou thinkest thou might later commit, tick paranoid next to PTSD. Verily, verily, off thy tongue let the fateful words roll trippingly. Then before thy office the poor wretch starts to depart. This is thy curse. Prescribe. When thou runnest out of people here on whom thy kindness to bestow, like the merchants of old, be bold, and set sail for lands yet untapped. How about Sri Lanka? How about Ghana? How about the Congo? Surely they too can gain from the white man's game. This is thy curse. Prescribe. And if perchance thou findest thyself losing the credibility battle, time it will be to name the latest disease, prognostically speaking, the horror of horrors, acute anti-psychiatry disorder. Quick, enter it into the DSM, ensuring that no other diseases it borders. And as the ignorant celebrate in the noonday sun, and as liberation rings from the mountaintop, this is thy curse. Prescribe. Thank you very much, people.